Did you know that one of the greatest films ever made almost had a completely different star? A ski slope, a broken back, and one last-minute phone call changed Hollywood history forever. The film is All About Eve. It came out in 1950. It is a story about ambition, betrayal, and what happens when you trust the wrong person. Sharp as a knife, beautiful as a dream. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about All About Eve. Number 20. The skiing accident that rewrote history. Imagine this. You have prepared for months for the biggest role of your career. You have read the script cover to cover 100 times. You have spoken the lines in your sleep. The sets have been built. The costumes have been measured and sewn. The cameras are almost ready to roll. And then you fall. That is exactly what happened to the actress Claudette Colbert in the summer of 1950. She had been cast as Margot Channing, the brilliant, fiery, larger-than-life theater star at the heart of All About Eve. The role was hers. The contract was signed. Everyone at 20th Century Fox was excited. But then Claudette went skiing at Sun Valley in Idaho, and she injured her back so badly that she could not stand, let alone act. She had to withdraw from the film completely. The producers panicked. Sets were built. The costumes were ready. The schedule was moving forward. Every single day on a film set cost money, and now their leading lady was lying flat on her back in a hospital bed. They needed someone fast, someone with fire, someone big enough to carry this enormous, complicated, magnetic character on their shoulders. That someone was Bette Davis. Bette received the phone call and said yes immediately. She did not hesitate. She had not had a great role in years. Hollywood whispered that maybe her best days were behind her. She needed this role, and this role needed her. She poured every single emotion she had into Margot Channing: the fear of aging, the hunger to stay relevant, the fierce pride of a woman who refuses to disappear quietly. She did it brilliantly. She did it unforgettably. Claudette Colbert watched from the sidelines as the role she lost became one of the most celebrated performances in film history. She never said much about it publicly. Looked like a catastrophe, turned out to be the greatest gift Hollywood ever accidentally gave us. Number 19. The magazine story that started everything before. There was a film, there was a magazine. A small, quiet story published in Cosmopolitan magazine in May of 1946. It was called The Wisdom of Eve. The woman who wrote it was named Mary Orr. She was not a famous author. She was a playwright and an actress, working in the world of theater. What she personally witnessed one evening among friends, Mary Orr had a close friend, a celebrated actress named Elizabeth Bergner. Elizabeth was Austrian-born and hugely admired in the theater world of England and Europe. One day, a young woman appeared in Elizabeth's life. Soft-spoken, sweet, apparently devoted. She said all the right things. She made herself incredibly useful. She helped with everything and asked for nothing. She seemed almost too good to be true. She was. Slowly and carefully, this young woman studied Elizabeth from the inside. She learned how she worked, how she spoke, how she thought about a role. She absorbed all of it like a sponge. And then, piece by piece, she began using what she had learned to advance her own career. When Elizabeth understood what had happened, the damage was done. Mary Orr watched it all unfold. She was horrified. She was fascinated. She wrote it down as fiction, changed the names, and placed it on Broadway instead of London. The scheming young woman became Eve Harrington. Title became The Wisdom of Eve. A film director named Joseph L. Mankiewicz read that story in that magazine and felt the dramatic truth buried inside. He turned it into a screenplay, then a film, then a masterpiece. One real betrayal. One woman who wrote it down. One director who saw what it could be. Truth, it turns out, was always stranger than fiction. Number 18. A young blonde in the background. She had only a few minutes of screen time. She spoke only a small number of lines, but the moment she walked in front of the camera, something happened that no one could quite explain. People straightened in their seats. They leaned forward. They felt that rare electric thing that happens when a screen shows you someone extraordinary before the world has caught on. That someone was a 24-year-old actress named Marilyn Monroe. In All About Eve, Marilyn plays a small character called Miss Caswell. She arrives at a party on the arm of the sharp theater critic Addison DeWitt, played by George Sanders. Addison introduces her as a graduate of the Copacabana School of Dramatic Art. It is one of the most wickedly funny lines in the whole film, and Marilyn delivers her own lines with perfect comic timing, eyes wide, voice soft and slightly dreamy, every word landing exactly right. At the time of filming, Marilyn Monroe was almost unknown, briefly in a few earlier pictures, but nothing that made anyone take real notice. About Eve was not supposed to launch her. It was supposed to be a background role and nothing more. Something in her could not be hidden. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz later said that Marilyn took direction with extraordinary ease and seemed to understand the camera instinctively, a quality that many experienced actors spend their whole careers trying to develop. In just a few years of this film, Marilyn Monroe would become the most recognized actress in the world. But here, in 1950, she was simply a young woman standing near the edge of someone else's story. She looked like a footnote. History had already decided she was a headline. Number 17. Love in the middle of all that chaos. A film is exhausting. The long days, the hot lights, pressure of finding a character and keeping them alive, take after take after take. Emotions run high, tensions rise, and sometimes in all of that beautiful, difficult chaos, something happens that nobody planned for at all. Bette Davis, All About Eve was not just a career-defining performance. It was where she fell in love. Actor playing her on-screen love interest, the passionate film director Bill Sampson, was a man named Gary Merrill. He was strong, serious, and completely committed to his craft. From almost the first days of filming, he and Bette Davis began to feel something growing between them. Their chemistry in front of the camera was real because what was happening behind the camera was also real. They were falling for each other, and everyone on set could feel it. Just after filming ended, Bette Davis and Gary Merrill got married. It was the summer of 1950. Had been married before and knew well enough that love in Hollywood was fragile and complicated. But she spoke about Gary with a kind of hope that sounded different from anything she had said before. They adopted children together and built a home together. Marriage lasted 10 years before it ended in divorce in 1960. By most accounts, it was passionate, dramatic, and deeply difficult. Not entirely unlike the characters they had played for each other on screen. But for a time, it was real and full and alive. The cameras captured their feelings before they had found the words to name them. That is what film does at its most honest. It shows you the truth before you are ready to say it. Number 16, 14. A number that stood alone for nearly 50 years. When the nominations for the 23rd Academy Awards were announced, Hollywood stopped and stared. All About Eve had received 14 nominations. 14. No film in the entire history of the Academy Awards had ever received that many at once. The Oscars had existed since 1929. Think about what 14 nominations means. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Art Direction, Best Sound, and more. To have a film reach into every corner of filmmaking excellence in that way is almost impossible to imagine. It meant that in category after category, The voters looked at everything that had come out that year and said, All About Eve was the best. The number 14 was a record, and it stood alone and unchallenged for 47 years. It was finally matched in 1998 when Titanic also received 14 nominations. Nearly half a century, All About Eve had sat at the very top of that particular piece of history. No explosions, no special effects, no enormous budget. Just words, performances, and a story about what people do to each other when they want something badly enough. Those 14 nominations, the film won 6 Oscars. Some people said that winning 6 out of 14 was a disappointment. 6 Oscar wins is never a disappointment. Stories behind some of the nominations that did not result in wins are just as fascinating, several of which we will come to very shortly. For now, just hold that number in your mind. 14. And for nearly 50 years, no one could match it. Number 15. The Man Who Won Everything. 2 years running. Rare moments in art when one person enters a perfect streak of brilliance, when everything they create turns to gold. Joseph L. Mankiewicz had one of those streaks. He had 2 consecutive years of it, back to back, and left the entire industry standing in quiet amazement. At the Academy Award ceremony in 1950, Mankiewicz won Best Director and Best Adapted Screenplay for a witty and celebrated film called A Letter to Three Wives. People applauded warmly, a great achievement, and then naturally they expected him to take a breath and let someone else step forward. He did not step forward. He stepped forward again. Very next year, he directed All About Eve. He also wrote the screenplay. And at the Academy Awards in 1951, he won again. Director, Best Adapted Screenplay. 2 awards for the 2nd year running. No director and screenwriter had ever won both prizes in 2 consecutive years. He walked up to that stage and collected his awards with quiet elegance, as if he had simply been doing what any reasonable person might do. The screenplay itself is a wonder of construction, which had a gift for dialogue that is almost impossible to teach. Lines that flow naturally when spoken aloud, but are actually crafted with the precision of a jeweler. Every word chosen, every pause deliberate, every silence carrying as much weight as the words around it. He reportedly wrote much of the script under intense time pressure, in concentrated bursts, barely sleeping, driven by the story's possibilities. It seems was something he used as fuel rather than something he ran for. 2 years, 4 major awards, one man who refused to be ordinary. The industry was dazzled, and perhaps just a little afraid. Number 14, the most famous line in a film full of famous lines. A truly great film eventually gives the world at least one line that outgrows the movie itself. A sentence that people repeat at dinner tables and in conversations and in the quiet of their own minds, long after the credits have rolled. A handful of words that feel like they were written for all of time. All About Eve has one of those lines, the most celebrated line Bette Davis ever spoke in her entire long career. And it almost did not survive the editing process. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. Channing says it at a party, her voice dry and glittering with danger. Just understood that the young woman she trusted and welcomed into her home has been quietly, carefully, systematically stealing her life. Is not going quietly. She is going to make noise. She is going to fight. Davis delivered that line on set. The crew went still. There was something in the air, something that felt less like acting and more like a declaration. A battle cry made elegant by the force of her presence. Film Institute, which keeps careful records of the greatest moments in all of cinema, ranked "Fasten Your Seatbelts. It's Going to Be a Bumpy Night" as the 9th greatest movie quote of all time. Out of every line spoken in every film ever made. Number 9 in all of history. The line "its power" is not only the words, it is the complete human being that Bette Davis brings to every syllable. Slight tilt of her chin, the pause before the word bumpy. Fury and intelligence and wounded pride all move across her face in the same instant. Mankiewicz wrote the sentence. Davis made it eternal, not just a line. 13. 2 women, 1 prize. Nobody won. This is one of the most quietly dramatic stories in Oscar history. And it happened not because anyone planned it, but because of a decision made by one of the actresses herself. The films of 1950 were being considered for Academy Award nominations. Both Bette Davis and Anne Baxter were eligible for their performances in All About Eve. Margot Channing, the fierce, brilliant, terrified theater star. Anne played Eve Harrington, the scheming, patient, perfectly composed newcomer. Both performances were exceptional. Both women had poured everything they had into their role. Anne Baxter had been considered for the Best Supporting Actress category. The logic made some sense. Margot Channing is arguably the film's central character, and Eve, despite being in the title, operates more as the force that acts upon Margot than the primary perspective of the story. But Anne Baxter herself disagreed. She believed her performance was a leading one. She made her case. She argued for the move. The Academy agreed to place her in the Best Actress category. And suddenly, both Bette Davis and Anne Baxter, from the same film, were competing against each other for the same golden statue. Held its breath. 2 magnificent performances. 2 extraordinary women. 1 prize. Everyone assumed one of them would win. The winner was Judy Holliday for her performance in Born Yesterday. Many historians believe Davis and Baxter split the vote so evenly between their supporters that neither could build enough momentum to overcome Holliday's strong following. 2 extraordinary performances effectively canceled each other out. Bette Davis would never win an Oscar for Margot Channing. Many believe it was the greatest role of her remarkable career. It looked like a triumph. 2 nominations from the same film became one of the most bittersweet ironies in Oscar history. Number 12. The smoothest man in any room. In a film full of unforgettable performances, one man managed to stand apart from everyone else without raising his voice once. Not through spectacle, not through emotion, but through the sharp, cold, elegant precision of pure intelligence. Sanders played Addison DeWitt, the all-knowing theater critic who narrates the story and watches the drama of Eve Harrington's rise with the calm amusement of someone who already knows exactly how it ends. Addison wears his wickedness like a perfectly tailored suit. Every word he speaks is a small weapon. Every smile he offers hides a blade behind it. George Sanders won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for this performance. When he collected his award, he did so with the same dry, knowing air as the character, as if winning an Oscar was simply the natural outcome of being who he was. Screen, Sanders was famously sardonic and cynical about life. He found most human interactions predictable. He had a sharp, weary intelligence that he kept only lightly veiled in polite. People who worked with him said that playing Addison DeWitt required almost no transformation at all, just a careful, professional channeling of what was already there. That is an unfair reduction of his talent, though. Sanders was a masterful actor who understood perfectly when to say nothing and let a look carry the weight of a speech. Scenes where Addison corners Eve alone and reveals that he knows every secret she has ever tried to hide are among the most chilling in all of classic Hollywood cinema. The menace is not theatrical. It is quiet, real, cold. Turned a supporting role into the film's moral compass. Not the hero, not the villain. Something far more interesting, the person who sees everything clearly and chooses exactly what to do with that not smoothest man in any room, then and now. Number 10. Tallulah Bankhead was not amused. Not everyone watched All About Eve and felt proud of what they saw. One very famous woman sat through the film, grew very quiet, and then grew very, very loud. Her name was Tallulah Bankhead. She was one of the most theatrical, flamboyant, and entirely uncontainable personalities in the history of American entertainment. Her voice was deep as thunder and warm as firelight. Her laugh filled rooms and then spilled out into corridors. Her personality was not merely large, it was operatic. She made her own eccentricities into a kind of continuous performance, living her life as if the whole world were in. When Tallulah Bankhead watched Bette Davis play Margot Channing, she became absolutely certain, furious and certain, that the character was based on her. The sharp wit, the theatrical grande dame quality, the fierce pride, the terror of being outrun by someone younger, the refusal to give up gracefully. She saw herself in every single frame of the film. She said so to anyone who would listen. She complained to friends. She complained to journalists. She was angry, and she was vocal, and she wanted the world to know. The complicated truth is this. The original story by Mary Orr was drawn from Elizabeth Bergner's life, not Tallulah Bankhead. L. Mankiewicz, who shaped the screenplay, moved in theater circles where Tallulah was a legendary and larger-than-life figure. He knew her world intimately. It is entirely possible, many historians think it is likely, that some of Margot Channing's particular fire and personality came, consciously or unconsciously, from everything Mankiewicz had observed about Tallulah over the years. Mankiewicz never fully confirmed this. He said Margot was her own creation. Tallulah never accepted that answer. If she was right, it was the most extraordinary compliment that could have been paid to her. To be the inspiration for one of cinema's most iconic characters. She never saw it that way. She saw it as theft, and she held on to that feeling until the end. Number 9. Made against the clock. Some of the most remarkable things in history were made under impossible pressure. A symphony written in a fever. A painting finished hours before the deadline. One of the finest screenplays Hollywood has ever known, written in a race against time that should not have produced anything good at all. When Claudette Colbert withdrew from the film and Bette Davis stepped in, the production could not afford to slow down. He was flowing out every single day. Schedules had been made, decisions had been set in motion, and Bette Davis, ready and burning to work, was waiting. Everything needed to keep moving forward. Joseph L. Mankiewicz threw himself into the task. He was simultaneously directing the production, making every creative decision, working with every actor, solving every problem that arose on set, and still rewriting the script at night. He was refining scenes, sharpening lines, finding the best version of each moment. By some accounts, there were days when scenes were completed just hours before they were filmed. Think about the pressure of that. You are directing a major motion picture during the day and writing its most important scenes by lamplight at night. There is no room for hesitation. There is no time for doubt. Every word you put on the page will be spoken aloud the next morning. And yet, look at the result. The script for All About Eve sparkles. It has the energy and momentum of something written by someone who has no time to second-guess themselves. The dialogue moves fast and sharp and true. It lands every time. There is a theory among writers that pressure removes the unnecessary. When you have no time to add flourishes, you write only the truth. When the clock is running, you find out what the scene is actually about. It looked effortless on screen. Behind the camera, it was anything but. Number 8. The story that shows you. The ending. First, most films begin at the beginning. They introduce you to characters, build tension over time, lead you to a climax, and offer you a resolution. It is a familiar and comforting shape. It is how most stories have been told since people first gathered around fires to share them. All About Eve does something smarter and stranger than that. The film opens at an awards ceremony. See Eve Harrington receiving the Sarah Siddons Award for Distinguished Achievement in the Theater, the highest theatrical honor in the world of the story. She stands there in the lights, radiant and triumphant, the most celebrated young actress in New York. She has won. She has everything. And then the film goes backward. It takes us all the way back to the beginning, to a rainy night outside a theater stage door where Eve was nobody. A lonely, quiet young woman in a wet coat, clutching herself in the cold, waiting for a single glimpse of the actress she loved most in the world. We watch her entire journey, from that dark doorstep all the way back to that bright stage. This technique is called a framing device, showing the destination before revealing the road. It completely changes the emotional experience of watching the film. Because we already know Eve wins, the movie is no longer about whether she will succeed. It is about what she is willing to do, and what it will cost every person who trusted her. You do not watch with hope. You watch with dread. When the kindness comes, you flinch, because you know what it is really worth. When the friendship is offered, you feel the trap closing. Every warmth becomes a threat. Mankiewicz understood that knowing the ending can make a story more powerful, not less. The destination is not the point. The journey is. And the journey hits harder when you already know where it leads. Number 7. Broadway said thank you. 20 years later. When a film truly reaches into the heart of things, it does not stay still. It moves outward, it seeps into the culture, and finds its way into other stories, other forms, other stages. All About Eve was so richly dramatic, so completely human, that 20 years after its release, Broadway reached out and took it back for itself. In 1970, a musical called Applause opened on the Broadway stage. It was a direct adaptation of All About Eve, the same story, the same characters, but transformed now into song and choreography and the particular electricity that only live theater can create. The title came from one of the oldest sayings in show business, that the sound of an audience's applause is the most addictive thing a performer can ever know. The role of Margot Channing went to Lauren Bacall. She was already a legend, known for her extraordinary presence, her deep voice, her intelligence, and her long and remarkable career. Taking on a role that Bette Davis had made so famous was a bold choice. But Bacall did not try to imitate Davis. She brought something entirely her own, a weary grace, a warmth beneath the surface fire, a woman who had seen much and was not surprised by any of it. Applause was a triumph. It won 4 Tony Awards, including Best Musical and Best Actress in a musical for Lauren Bacall. Audiences loved it. Critics celebrated it. And it proved something important, that All About Eve was not locked to one decade or one medium. The story worked in any form because it was about something that never expires. Ambition? Friendship used as a weapon. The terror of being replaced? These things are not period pieces from film to stage and back to film again. The story kept moving forward. It always will. Number 6. The woman the industry had given up on. Before All About Eve, there were whispers. The kind of whispers that follow talented people when the roles begin to thin and the phone begins to ring a little less often. Quiet, cruel whispers that ask, is she still relevant? Does she still have it? Has the moment passed? Those whispers followed Bette Davis into the late 1940s. She had been one of the most powerful actresses in Hollywood through the 1930s and early 40s. She had won 2 Academy Awards. She had fought with studios for better roles and won those battles too. She had been a genuine force of the industry. But time moved on, fashions shifted, and the studio system was changing. The roles being offered to her were smaller and less interesting. She was in her early 40s, and in Hollywood, unfairly, cruelly, and consistently, women in their early 40s were often treated as if they had aged out of relevance. She had not. But the industry had started to believe it. All About Eve arrived and changed everything overnight. Her performance as Margot Channing was completely fearless. She did not try to appear younger than she was. She did not soften the character's sharp edges or hide the character's fear. She played a woman who was brilliant and furious and desperately, heartbreakingly vulnerable. A woman who knew time was moving faster than she could run and refused to stop fighting anyway. A woman who was inconvenient and magnificent in equal measure. It was the role of a lifetime, and she made every second of it true. After All About Eve, the whispers stopped entirely. The world remembered precisely what Bette Davis was and what she had always been. She was irreplaceable, and the film proved it to anyone who had forgotten. Number 5. The clothes that told the story. In a truly great film, nothing is accidental. Not the color of a room, not the weight of a silence, and certainly not the clothes. All About Eve takes place in the world of Broadway theater, where appearances carry enormous meaning, where how you dress and how you move and how you enter a room all send messages before you have spoken a single word. The filmmakers understood this completely. And so every costume in the film was designed not just to look beautiful, but to communicate something true about the person wearing it. The costumes for the film were overseen by Edith Head and Charles Lemaire, 2 of the most celebrated names in Hollywood fashion design. Charles Lemaire served as head of wardrobe at 20th Century Fox and had a deep understanding of how clothing functions as character on screen. Meanwhile, was one of the most decorated costume designers in the history of Hollywood. Career, she won 8 Academy Awards for costume design, more than any other person has ever won in that category. She understood that clothes are not decoration. They are a language. They tell the truth even when the character is lying. In All About Eve, that language is precise and deliberate. Margot Channing wears dramatic, confident pieces, gowns and coats that fill a room, clothes that say, I am here, and I am not apologizing for it. Eve Harrington, by contrast, dresses simply and modestly. She wears careful, quiet things. She dresses to disappear, to seem small, to seem harmless. But watch what happens as the film progresses and Eve gains more power. Her clothes begin to change. They grow bolder, more polished, more like Margot's. She is not just stealing Margot's career, she is wearing it. The costumes won an Academy Award that year. Every stitch earned it. Number 4. Before the movie, there was a radio show. Most people know that All About Eve began as a short story in a magazine, but fewer people know that before it ever became a film, the story of Eve Harrington first traveled into American living rooms through the warm, crackling magic of radio. In the 1940s, radio was what television would later become, the great shared storytelling medium of American life. Families gathered around their radio sets in the evenings. They listened to dramas, comedies, and adventure stories brought to life by professional actors and carefully crafted scripts. A well-made story could travel from the printed page into a radio broadcast and reach millions of listeners who had never read the original. The Wisdom of Eve, Mary Orr's short story about the dangerous young fan who uses devotion as a weapon, was adapted into a radio drama before Hollywood ever picked it up. Radio anthology programs of the era were prestigious productions, carefully written, professionally performed, and widely heard across the country. Being adapted for such a program meant your story had proven itself. It had real power. It could reach into the emotions of an audience and hold them there. The radio play brought the tale of Eve Harrington to a wide American audience for the first time. Listeners heard the drama unfold in the dark of their living rooms, the quiet fan, the trusting actress, the slow and patient betrayal. They heard it with no pictures, no costumes, no sets, just voices and words and the power of imagination, and they were completely gripped by it. By the time Joseph L. Mankiewicz turned it into a film, the story had already proven itself in two forms. It had moved people in print and moved people on the airwaves. Now it was ready for the screen. Great stories find every available stage. They are always looking for a bigger room. Number 3. The Woman Who Saw Through Everything. In a film full of dazzling, complicated, emotionally enormous performances, one woman did something quieter and in some ways more powerful than any of them. She watched. She knew. And she told the truth in plain language, while everyone around her was speaking in theater. Thelma Ritter played Bertie, Margot Channing's longtime personal assistant and dresser. Bertie has worked for Margot for years. She knows her better than anyone. She has no illusions and no patience for nonsense. While everyone else in the film is dazzled by Eve Harrington's sweetness and devotion, Bertie is watching from the corner with those steady, knowing eyes. She sees through Eve from almost the very first moment. She says so clearly, nobody listens. Thelma Ritter received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress for this role. It was the first of 6 career Oscar nominations she would receive over her lifetime. 6 nominations, not 1 win. This placed her in the unusual and bittersweet position of being one of the most consistently nominated actresses in Hollywood history never to take home the award. 6 times the industry said she was extraordinary. 6 times the prize went elsewhere. But here is what matters. Ritter's performance in All About Eve is extraordinary. She delivers her lines with a working-class New York directness that cuts through all the theatrical glamour around her. Every other character in the film speaks in polished, carefully crafted sentences. Bertie speaks plainly. Bertie speaks honestly. And because she speaks honestly, we believe her completely when she says something is wrong. There is a moment in the film, barely a second long, where Bertie watches Eve perform a small, perfectly calibrated act of sweetness. And Bertie's face goes very still. She has understood something. She has already understood everything. Thelma Ritter made that single quiet moment speak volumes. The most honest person in the room never wins the prize, but she is always the most important person in the room. Number 2. The tension that lived on both sides of the camera. A film about professional jealousy, hidden ambition, and the careful rivalry between women might be expected to have a perfectly harmonious, cooperative, warm set behind the scenes. As it turned out, life on the set of All About Eve was somewhat more complicated than that. Bette Davis was a force. She had strong and deeply held opinions about acting, about filmmaking, about how a scene should breathe. She believed in absolute commitment to the work and had little patience for anything she perceived as carelessness or mediocrity. This made her one of the most powerful performers in Hollywood. It also made her a challenging presence to share a set with if your working style was significantly different from hers. Celeste Holm, who played Karen Richards in the film, had a reputation for warmth and collaboration on set. She was the kind of actress who checked in with colleagues, kept the energy generous, and worked to keep the mood light between difficult scenes. According to people who were present during the production, Davis and Holm found each other's styles difficult to reconcile. There were no dramatic eruptions, nothing that made headlines, but a quiet, careful coolness ran beneath the pleasantries. Holm later spoke in interviews about finding the experience difficult. Anne Baxter and Bette Davis carried their own complicated dynamic. Both were giving everything they had. Both were aware that critics were watching every scene. And both understood, as the shoot progressed, that they might eventually find themselves competing for the same award. That awareness was present in every shared scene, creating a tension between them that no director could have manufactured in rehearsal. In the end, the friction behind the camera fed the film in front of it. A story about professional competition and carefully hidden animosity was being played by people navigating their own versions of exactly that. What looked graceful on screen had teeth behind it. Number 1. The film that only gets deeper with time. Some films belong entirely to their era. They capture a specific fashion, a specific mood, a particular moment in cultural history. They age along with everything around them and eventually become fascinating artifacts, important to study, interesting to admire, but no longer fully alive in the way they once were. All About Eve is not one of those films. It refuses to age. It keeps deepening instead. When it was released in 1950, it was celebrated for its brilliant performances, its sharp dialogue, and its sophisticated portrait of the theatrical world. Audiences recognized the characters immediately, the older star fighting for her place, the dangerous newcomer with her calculated sweetness, the knowing critic who watches it all with cold amusement. 75 years later, audiences still recognize all of them, because the story was never really about Broadway.